1 second. And okay, you're all active.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Executive Committee meeting. It's great to see everyone. I hope you are all doing well. This is an important kind of juncture as we come together towards the end of the academic year that has just seen so much evolution at USG. So we are going to really dig in with you today on two things, and we're going to ask for your kind of active participation as our executive committee. One is just to sort of talk about, for us as the board, the alignment of the board of advisors to the work of USG 2.0 and possible restructuring of our committees to think about how we really best support the work and show up and be present in a way that makes a huge positive impact. And also want to sort of fill you in on incredible movement, particularly with some Montgomery County initiatives for the upcoming fiscal year and how they're connected to 2.0. So we all know that Anne has been phenomenally busy thinking about how to take the next steps on implementation. And I want to make sure that the executive committee understands some of the things that are happening and in place to move forward, as well as then thinking about our own role in that. So before we jump in, I just wanted to say, Wayne, I'm Shirley Brandman. We have not met yet, and I just want to give you a chance to say hello. There may be others in the executive committee who have not had a chance to meet you as well. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Hello.
Hey, good morning.
Hi, I'm Wayne Saxton, or Chris Saxton. I'm the Director of Information Technology at USG.
Great. Well, welcome. Good to have you with us. And with that, Anne, why don't I turn it over to you to just start talking about give us an overview of some of the implementation initiatives so the executive board can have a sense of how we're making the strategic plan real.
Thank you, Shirley. I don't have a presentation for this part of it. I don't want to over-present too many slides, so I'll just speak to the different initiatives that are underway. The top initiative that many of you are familiar with is our fiscal model. We are working with RPK, a consulting firm led by Rick Stasloff. Rick, as many of you will know, served as one of the co-chairs of our working group on the fiscal model during the strategic planning process. And he and his company are working with us on a number of deliverables. We're working to provide an exposure to a return on investment lens for Shady Grove for the work that we do with our fiscal model. We are working to identify our current and our potential service lines. This is a really important part of this process. So a big data dump to a lot of data to Rick and his team that our team has been phenomenally helpful in pulling together and providing. There's going to be a series of interviews that are conducted. A number of you will be called in to sit and talk with them, looking again at our current service lines and our potential service lines. So this is a really important part of the process that will be aligned with the other work that we're doing as well. During this process, we will create a pro forma financial model and also develop an action plan for getting there. So that work is underway. We've put together a very small steering committee to work with Rick. On that committee is Ellen Herbst, our own wonderful leader from the University System of Maryland. We have also Bob Youngentab, who is one of our co-chairs of our financial resources committee, and also Minnis Reidenauer, who is the former CFO and senior resource fellow at Virginia Tech. So that team is going to be working in advisory capacity with Rick's team. And then, of course, Rick will be engaging with a number of our own financial experts on this board, and we will as well throughout this process. So that is underway. A second initiative that's underway is around data analytics and developing an integrated data strategy for USG, both for our internal operations as well as for the work that we will be doing around planning for pathways and around the research associated with building and supporting pathways with our academic partners and with our partners, our academic partners in Montgomery County, as well as in the system. And that work is really interesting. We're working with a team, Mary, I'm blanking on the name of our consulting team for the data group.
Slow talk.
No, not Slow Talk.
West.
Sorry. No, it's not West Ed either. It'll come to me. But anyway, they're a phenomenal group. They work on helping teams develop research infrastructure and research strategies. And so we are working with them on that. And we'll say more about this in a minute, but we did receive a request earlier from the county to develop an institute we're calling the Ready Institute. And that we did receive funding for that this year and to stand that up. And we're very excited to work with our partners at Montgomery College and MCPS over the next year to stand that up and to really get it focused on the collective work. But Ready will also be an important part of some of our own internal data strategy work as well. And then
the company is called Merrimack.
Merrimack. Thank you, Mary.
Sorry.
I knew it started with
know
an M.
which ones you were talking about.
I couldn't think. And then we just completed work on a student services task force. We created a task force to look at our student services at Shady Grove in order to transition them thoughtfully and carefully to a career ready model. And that task force has wrapped up its work. They're developing the report. Joe, the report's going to come to you and to me as well for our review and consideration. And then there'll be a set of recommendations about the transition and an action team to transition to a career ready model for our student services going forward. That task force was heavily supported by all of our partner university team members here. And also we had Patty Alvarez, who was from University of Maryland, Baltimore, who was a co-chair with our own Robin D. Nicola on that effort. Kudos to their leadership. They did a fantastic job with this task force. I'm really excited to see the recommendations, and we're already starting to think about the transition and planning for the transition into career ready, and hope to have a framework in place in the fall. And then we've been thinking a lot about employer engagement and community wealth building, and you'll learn more about that as we go into our Board of Advisors discussion as well around employer engagement and what that looks like for Shady Grove. So those are some of the things. I will mention one other. Mary mentioned Slow Talk. Slow Talk is a consultancy that is focused on forging purposefulness and meaningfulness in organizations through conversation and through analysis of conversation. And we are working with Slow Talk and our team here on a series throughout the summer, a pilot throughout the summer and into the fall, and then a bigger project, which will work on moving forward on our commitments in the strategic plan and the values in the strategic plan and how we do that together. Again, building a stronger sense of purposefulness and meaningfulness in the culture at USG. So those are some of the initiatives underway, Shirley, and happy to answer any questions about them, but also happy to hand it back to you.
I'm just going to lead off with a question, Anne. So in terms of the committee that's doing the fiscal model work, is the timing such that we're planning to have something to present to the legislature next session?
Oh, yes. We will have at least a working model to present to the legislature. Yeah, absolutely.
So before I open up to any other questions, part of why I asked Anne to just sort of share is to make real to us as the executive committee, what's the work that has to happen so that the strategic plan is not simply the plan on the shelf, and how do you get to the next step? So, there's obviously a lot of thinking coming together, conversation, dialogue, planning that's happening. And I appreciate sort of understanding the overview. Obviously, we will be eager to also see the recommendations as they come forward and the change that's moving forward. But I felt like I wanted people to understand some of the energy that's happening right now in the implementation phase. Any questions for Anne about this work? Feels like a lot.
Yeah.
It is a lot.
Yeah, Shirley, I'll just say too, the USG team is amazing right now. I mean, we're working with a lot of consultants, but managing the consultancies and then integrating the work that we're doing into our own capacity and building that out. We're also in the midst of a massive personnel strategy implementation as well. That is a really big lift that both Joe and Ellen have been really involved in, as well as Jen Rice and the UHR team at College Park. And so there's a lot of change underway, but I just want to signal our executive council team, which has been phenomenal and is phenomenal in working this through. Everyone's embracing it and pushing the work forward. And our broader USG team also, everyone is working double time, but really, really leaning into some of the uncertainty and the change, but excited about the future, I think. So I just want to give a call out to the amazing team that's really moving this work forward.
Absolutely. Kudos. Thanks, Anne. Okay, so now thinking about some of the implementation work that's happening, but also just coming back to the vision for USG 2.0. We've had one conversation as a full board about where our board strategic plan, how it intersects with the USG strategic plan. But now as we're wrapping up this year of the Board of Advisors, really thinking about specifically our structure, our roles, our committees, and how we best do the work. We're opening up a dialogue for you. We're going to present some ideas that are half baked, 3/4 of the way baked. We've really thought it through, but we very much are bringing it to this group today because we want to have a conversation, because we want your thoughts and we want your input before we finalize. So in that spirit, Anne, I'll ask you to lead us off.
Thank you. Thank you, Shirley. So as Shirley said, as we're moving into USG 2.0, the flywheel is the center focus of what we're doing, as well as these industry clusters that pathways will be built around. And so as we think about how do we deliver on the promise, which is at the heart of the plan, which is extending our focus from degree completion to meaningful careers, and really thinking about career readiness. Meaningful careers are employer engagement is crucial in that process, and how the framework we build to engage employers to ensure that that successful outcome and continued lifelong career. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of expectation, and delivering on the promise is going to be really hard, and we may not be very good at it initially, and we'll have a lot of learning to do. But the only way we can start to really deliver on that is to align every resource, every ounce of energy we have in that direction, and really start thinking holistically about how we structure ourselves, not only internally in USG, but our board of advisors as well. And even thinking about graduates of our programs and how they might play a role in helping to build out some of this infrastructure and some of the mentoring and support that goes along with this as well. So what I'm going to share with you is an overview of some of our thinking at this point. And we've had this conversation with our board officers and with our internal USG team to be thinking about some ideas of how we might restructure the board slightly to align more with the direction we're going with these industry clusters. So I'm going to share my screen.
And before you put up the slide, I just want to invite Kevin. Did you have any thoughts that you want to share before?
Hey, how are you?
Sure. I do. And part of
Hold on one second.
this,
Jeff, we're hearing you in the background. Can you mute, please? Sorry, Kevin.
I think it's the Zoom monitor.
Or Karen as well.
So part of this discussion that Anne's going to share, it's as it appears, I will succeed surely as a board chair. And part of my thinking around that was looking at the fact that the board of advisors had gone through a process led by Mike and Roya aptly to put us together a strategic plan that has driven us for the last few years, which I think was a good step, because I think we didn't really have USG in a position where it really did have that strategic view, being more reactive. So what I started to think about was my own career, and I probably the first of our maybe there are others I don't know about, but to actually have had a board as a CEO of an organization. And one of the things that my board chair always said to me was, there's two ways to think about a board and board meetings. One was to get through them, and two was to actually get a board that you need to implement what you're trying to do. And I thought about that in the context of what our strategic plan was for the board and what USG 2.0 was as our go forward. And as Ann will demonstrate through, I think, her presentation, these industry clusters present a new and different approach to how we are going to try and operate this organization. And I thought that the board ought to align its agenda and focus with that. I mean, we are strictly an advisory board. We have no fiduciary responsibilities, as it were. And so as advisors and action agents for her ability to lead and reach the targets that she set forward, we ought to align ourselves with that. One of the key advantages I think that it gives us is a way to measure our own success as a board, because there are objectives in this 2.0 plan that we should be able to align our activities with to demonstrate that we actually are being effective as a board. And I think that's primarily one of the big reasons I think this is an important endeavor. I won't say a lot more. I think there's an opportunity for us all to engage in this activity, but I think for me, that was important. And I think how we structure our committees and our engagement, which I think still is important, because clearly there's still legislative issues that we need to pay attention to. There are financial model that we need to advocate and continue to help those who may not be completely on board with it to understand. There's a lot of work to do around that, but then there's also this work that the staff is going to do that we need to figure out how we help and support that, as well as the continued support that we know the students need. So with that, I'll be quiet, let Ann get to this.
Thank you, Kevin. Really appreciate that. And just greatly appreciate how everybody on this board, the support, the energy, the commitment to USG, and then this initial thinking around USG 2.0, the creativity and the enthusiasm that's gone into thinking about this is greatly appreciated. So thank you. Okay, let me share my screen. All right, let's see, slideshow. Okay. This is, you're all familiar with this. This is the role of our Board of Advisors: advice and support to the Executive Director, guidance on strategic development and implementation, and demonstrating commitment to access and higher education for all students in accordance with the Board of Advisors statement on commitment to equity. This doesn't change. This is the core premise and foundation of our Board of Advisors. Our current structure of the Board of Advisors, we have a board officers, which includes a chair and 3 vice chairs. We have an executive committee that is made up of the board officers, our ex officio members, representation from the Board of Regents, from the Montgomery College Board of Trustees, from Montgomery College, MCPS, and myself as executive director. And we have co-chairs of all of our committees that are also on the executive committee. And then our committee structure includes the Student Success Committee, the Next Gen Committee, Board Engagement, Community Voice, and Financial Resources. So just a refresher on where we are. But thinking about USG 2.0 and the Board of Advisors 2.0, if you will, I don't know if that's appropriate to say BOA 2.0 or not. But these are some of the questions or some of the kind of ideas that are informing where we might go with the board. One is, can we think about the board as a foundation of USG employer engagement and strategy and the equity promise? So we have a strong commitment from the board already towards the equity promise. can we think about the foundation of the board also in terms of employer engagement? We spent a lot of time over the last year in USG and with our partners thinking about what should be the employer engagement strategy, how do we do that? And it seems really clear that our board of advisors could be the heart and the soul of that employer engagement strategy. So thinking about the board of advisor committees that align with industry clusters. So I'll share a graphic in a moment, but we're thinking about industry clusters as the core of pathways. And so thinking about industry clusters in STEM, which would include IT and cyber and data analytics and engineering, around healthcare and the life sciences, around public service and education and the social sciences, and around business writ large. If those are the clusters we end up going with, we are thinking about all of our work around USG around those clusters. So can we think about the board of advisors also around those clusters? And then the board of advisor committees, can we also think about how the committees might more explicitly integrate with internal USG operations around the industry cluster? We are working towards a USG structure where the work of USG will be activated. The flywheel work will be activated around industry cluster teams inside USG. So can we think about how the board might align and integrate with some of the work within USG as well? And then let's think about how then we might clarify the commitments that we're asking the board members around building active networks in support of industry clusters and pathways. But more generally, this is an important question that's come up. What would be the commitment we'd be asking board members in moving towards this model, and what would be asking board members to commit to as part of that effort? And then can we think about aligning recruitment along with industry clusters, but also with our needs, our strong needs, which Kevin lifted up importantly. We still have very strong needs for our board around advocacy and communication. That doesn't change. We still need that very much so. What we'd like to put out for discussion and for thought and consideration today is a slight change in how we think about the board of advisors. And that would include slimming down our board officers to 2 vice chairs, and Shirley and Kevin can talk more about that. The executive committee would stay the same with the exception that we'd have different committees. So it might be different committee co-chairs who serve on that, but that would be representing still the committees. And then the committees themselves would be advocacy and communication. So keeping the advocacy and communication front and center, but then the other industry cluster committees for the work of the board. Now, here's a graphic that I'd like to share as a way to kind of illustrate how we're thinking about this. You can see the flywheel. Y'all remember the flywheel from the strategic planning effort. The flywheel captures USG operations and culture. We plan and integrate for pathways. We measure, assess, and learn what we're doing in those pathway efforts. We innovate our academic planning from the data. We focus on developing career-ready graduates, and which helps build community wealth, which brings us back to thinking about our structure and our internal operations and our culture. At the heart of that is delivering on the promise, which is meaningful careers, meaningful employment upon graduation. And within USG, we see all the work that we're doing in USG, activating that flywheel is about delivering on the promise. And we envision within USG establishing and activating that work around these industry cluster committees. So health and life sciences, public service, education, social sciences, business, and also STEM. But then you'll see if you follow the dotted lines, our board of advisors would also be organized around those clusters. And we would envision maybe quarterly or every couple of months, the co-chairs or maybe the whole committee joining meetings within USG. And those meetings would be more kind of formal, data presentations, kind of a check-in between the USG team and the industry cluster team at the board of advisors, information sharing, really collaborative and catalytic, but also a chance for the USG team to share more explicitly what's happening, challenges, ideas, and get that board feedback at those times. So we envision this work of building the pathways being energized and informed by the work of these industry cluster committees that the board would be structured around. And, we would also have in USG kind of employer engagement teams that would work really closely in following up, but we would see the board really starting to build out, asking board members to help build out the network, the infrastructure in each of these areas for engaging employers, getting employer commitments, just really building out a sound ecosystem, if you will, around each of these industry clusters that can become a base, a foundation for the pathway work, and then ultimately delivering on the promise as well, that would feed into the work of USG and with our employer engagement teams. So I will stop there and take any questions or turn it back to Shirley and Kevin.
Guessing there are going to be some questions.
Yeah.
Let me, if you'll indulge me, let me take 1 minute, I think a little bit concretely. I'm just going to sort of take you through the path. Let's say we're recruiting a new board member, just to sort of understand, to put some of this into practice. So in the past, as you know, we've all been through it. When you're invited onto the board, there's a little bit of sharing about kind of the board responsibilities, but there's not necessarily an upfront ask, right? We have this year, for example, reached out to the whole board and said, we need everyone to sign up for career consulting. We need everyone to be engaged. So let's envision a system where that happens up front. We invite you onto our board, but up front, we say, when we're on the board, because we're all invested in student success, board members, and we can fill in the blanks. Every board member signs up for career consulting. Board members do mentoring, and we can individualize it. You come on to the board, you have a particular business expertise, you can offer an internship, but there's something about when you come onto the board immediately as part of your commitment to us, you are making some commitment to our students. Rather than having board committees, as you know, when we host our committees, we invite the wonderful people like the people on this call, Rob and Richie, to come to the meeting to support us. We have them come in and facilitate our conversations. Instead, we're going to join them, right? As Anne described, the USG team is focusing on the industry clusters. They are doing work. A few times a year, like our committees, maybe 3 times, maybe 4 times, there will be a moment when they will invite the board members who are part of that cluster into their conversation, where they will say, this is the work we're doing. This is where we're thinking. This is where we would benefit from your input. This is where we'd benefit from your action. So rather than us hosting Board of Advisor meetings, we as Board of Advisor members assigned to that industry cluster will kind of be joining the team and do the work. It means that some of the things that we do will then maybe become the work of the whole. So for example, student success, where we look at the ACEs pathway, or we look at some of the issues involving our students. Those are the things that jazz us all up anyway. Those can become standing items for the committee of the whole, rather than having a separate committee work on them. And that's a way to sort of bring us all together. But the idea here, I will say that over the years, I have heard board members share with me, they want to feel 2 things. Number one, see the direct connection to the time that we put in so that it benefits our students, but also to be actively engaged with the real work, right? Committees are never about make work or additional, but we want to really be furthering the work that's going on. And so a little bit of this vision is that being integrated into the industry clusters gets us a little closer to that. And with that, I'll stop. Joe, you have your hand up. You get to jump in first.
Thank you. This is a question as much about the teams that would be inviting the board members in. And I'm not clear at this point how the programs and the institutional teams who are delivering the degree programs into which internships would fit and so on, what the role of the program, the academic program people is in that pathway. And I'm just not clear on that yet.
And I'm going to defer to you.
Yeah, no, Joe, this is huge. And, building right now, we're really focused. I didn't talk about this in my opening remarks, but a big part of what we're focusing on right now is academic planning and working with the partners. And, there's a ton of work going on behind the scenes right now to figure out, how we start to more integrate the work around internships and mentoring with our partners. Some of our partners have their own individual systems and plans all over the place, and others are very dependent on what we do here at Shady Grove. So integrating that is going to be really important. And, I think this process of how we choose board members, and also how we, especially how we build out that infrastructure. Absolutely, our partners need to be integrated in that. Absolutely. So we can't do it without them, and we don't want to build parallel systems or competing systems. So I think we, thinking about how our academic partners might play a role in some of the board membership and some of the service on committees and stuff is a really interesting question. And we haven't gone that far in terms of the board, but definitely in terms of how we're thinking about this infrastructure and that work. We're having some really deep dive conversations with some of our individual partners, but that'll be part of the whole academic planning and thinking process that we go through this summer as well. So thanks for keeping it front and center.
Steve? You've done.
Yep, got it. Thank you. I think this is exciting and appropriate. I do have a couple of questions. One is, right now, through the Student Success Committee, for example, the work involving mentoring and internships and the like is being done for the Board of Advisors in total. When it's now going to be industry committees who are going to be working with staff and within their industry clusters to develop internships and mentoring and the like, what is the mechanism going to be to ensure best practices and sharing of information so that the healthcare and life sciences committee is is sharing information with the business committee, for instance? That is one question. If you don't mind, we'll get an answer to that, and then I'll come back to the next one.
You mean within the board, Steve, or within the
board?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the committee should regularly, that could be part of the process too, is the committees within the board meeting and sharing and talking as well. And I think there should also be some good exchange of information that happens within the internal committees at Shady Grove as well, that can go back out to the Board of Advisors. But I would think that, somewhere in that great process that Shirley kind of gave an overview of, that there would be board meetings where the different committees shared what's happening as well, and connected there. I think getting down into the detail of individual internships and that kind of thing, I think that needs the support of the USG team to coordinate and sort. But we don't want silos. We don't want silos. And
yes, that's what my concern is.
Yeah, and this is a really important point. I think this is such an important point, because we want to build pathways that take students to great careers, but we don't want to, we also want to empower, right? Students should have choices. Students should have, an opportunity to think about where they see a pathway and to make choices as well, and to try different things as well. And so I think that it's going to be tricky as we think about this framework. There has to be structure and guidance and clarity about how to get from point A to point B, but there also has to be some opportunity for choice and flexibility. And students should be able to see it. They may be in a STEM pathway, but they may want to, do an internship in the business pathway, and they may, they may be data analytics and want to do it in the health. There's got to be that kind of flexibility and opportunity. And so I think one of the ways we want to manage that, and Robin and Mary and others should jump in on this as well, but we don't want to build an infrastructure in Shady Grove for every single pathway. We want to build a common infrastructure that supports every pathway. And so that there's, every student should have a mentor, every student should have an experiential learning opportunity, every student should have an interview. There should be a common infrastructure that supports multiple pathways with different kinds of expertise. And hopefully that common infrastructure will be what prevents the siloing and the kind of narrowing down into without communication across. So I'll ask my team if they want to weigh in on that as well, if Rob and Mary want to say anything, or Chris or Richie.
The only other thing I would add is the infrastructure at Shady Grove. So as the team, the support staff are dealing with pieces of the flywheel in these healthcare, in the different industry clusters, we're designing something like a home base. So let's say within each of the industry clusters, there is staff that is supporting that cluster that includes board members and others, academic partners, et cetera. That staff, that is an IT part of the team, will have a home base with the other IT reps and the Department of IT at Shady Grove. So they will bring back to the home base what best practices are occurring in healthcare industry cluster. And they will also talk about challenges and how and where their IT reps are finding solutions that they can compile and keep track of. And then they go back out to serve the needs of those industry clusters. So the board members serving in each of the industry clusters, to your point, Steve, will be served by the support from Shady Grove. But to your point too, is there is benefit to bring the board industry clusters together at full board meetings to do those sharing and that kind of moving forward. I hope that's a little more explicit.
Thank you. Second,
wait,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Before we go on, I just want to add a thought. So I think we as board members are always dealing with the realistic tension between sort of the universal and the specific, by which I mean, we all, I think, have agreed, and the models we've set up, the career consulting, the mentoring, we understand, you know, I may not have a background in engineering, but I can still have a useful conversation with a student about how to develop a resume or how to present yourself or how to tell your story. So there are some things that are the universal, and those we want to kind of upfront, right? Those we want to create opportunities as board members join us to do the career consulting, to do the mentoring, where we're not as worried about the direct match. But we also know that as we tried as a board to build connections, whether it's been through hosting salons or inviting people into meetings or having conversations, there's a synergy when you're focused on an industry, right? Like there's a difference between students who need lab experience for the sciences they're going into and students who need, you know, different kind of business exposure where, so I think the idea is that the conversations that happen in the industry clusters allow you to get to the real meaningful, thoughtful, connections about creating those experiential opportunities that deeply serve the students. And I think to Anne's point, you know, then we clearly share those in conversation when we're together as committee of a whole, but we're trying to find that balance between the things that are universal and the things where the specifics are really going to be more beneficial to the students. Just my thoughts. Second question.
Second question real quick is, it seems like the workload on the board officers is going to be increasing. Partly the board engagement committee, my understanding, will be going away, and the work of finding new board members, well, I realize it will be a team effort, ultimately will be through the officers. I'm just wondering about the decision to go from, at a time when it appears that the workload is going to be increasing, the decision to go from 3 vice chairs to 2. And it seemed to me that having 3 at this time would be really helpful.
I actually think that's a good point.
Well, I'll comment. I don't know that we have to go to 2. We should certainly consider what makes the most sense. And again, trying to understand that, as Shirley said earlier, there is some still baking going on as we try to figure out what the right numbers are. And what we need in those capacities. So that's an open question, Steve. So it's a good question. I
just want to offer the historical perspective, right? When we went to the 3 vice chairs, there was a deliberate effort to think about how we as USG present public facing. So we sort of loosely thought, you know, somebody from the sciences, somebody from business, and then somebody from the kind of larger community, roughly, were what we were thinking, so that symbolically our officer team presented to the external world the areas that we were focusing on. So there's still a little bit of value in thinking about that piece of it. And then Steve, to your point, I actually agree. I think if we think about, the way we've run board engagement, if we dial the clock back even before Anne was with us, right? Like Stu, it was very engaged. Stu and Mary would kind of bring people all along in the chain. And then the board engagement committee was the last stop for an incoming potential board member to interact with some board members, ask questions of them, have some sharing, and then we'd pass it through. I think we're envisioning, again, in the alignment, really working through who do we need, as Kevin phrased it at the beginning, who do we need on the team to be able to get the work done? And in some ways, there may be a natural fit for the officers who meet more regularly, who are going to be connected to all the industry clusters, to be sort of driving some of that. And if we do that, I do think that there's value in a little bit, more capacity. So we may very much want to think about 3 vice chairs, and we may want to, some of it is we're giving ourselves a little bit permission, right? By coming to you today with this conversation as opposed to the slate, we know that we're sort of slowing down the process, but very intentionally, so that we don't just move ahead and follow the rules, but that we actually think about what we're doing. So thinking about the mix of who we present, the mix of people's experience, skill sets. But I think the point is well taken that we may be in the transition, really relying on officers to make sure that we blend that work that's happening in the industry clusters with the work of the full board, so that we're not siloed, so that we know what we're each doing, and so that we're recruiting exactly the experience and skill sets and passion that we need for the work. Joe?
Great summary.
Joe, you're on mute.
You're muted. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I'm thrilled at the amount of energy and so on, but I'm going to go back to my earlier question, and this is kind of for Anne as well. This conversation, if heard by some of our university partners who have degree programs at Shady Grove that have requirements and specific curriculum, were listening into this. I think there is the concern, maybe too strong a word, that in fact, all of a sudden, a degree program is going to have a board of advisors committee somehow guiding them, and I realize you all support them, not guide them. I'm more concerned about the impression and not the reality. Having worked with the Shady Grove Board of Advisors, you all are there and so helpful in so many ways. But I just want us to be careful in the rollout of this in such a way that our partners realize how this really works. And I'm not sure on a day-to-day basis right now they do in that kind of detail. And I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here, but I just want us to be careful.
No, that's a fair
You are
comment.
so right, Joe.
Shirley, you're
And
muted.
just before you answer, can I just ask a question so I can fully answer it, Joe? Because I think you're making a powerful point. But so in my head, and help me figure this out, if the message we're really trying to give to all our partners is we as a board want to sort of step up almost in terms of how we create that link and that opportunity in the promise of USG 2.0 to the career piece. So we are trying to put ourselves in a place where we hear more directly and more clearly, what is it you need for yourself? What are the kinds of experiences you'd like students in your program to have? And we are at the same time trying to break away from doing that degree by degree by degree and thinking about it in a pathway, right? So the industry cluster sort of puts you in that frame of mind of, we're saying to our students, a student comes to us and says, I think I want a career in health. And they're thinking very broadly about it. And now you're bringing board members in to help create some of the experiences that our partners want. I want to be sensitive to understanding how we're pushing their buttons. I'm not sure I fully understand. And I see Ellen wants to jump in. So I don't know, Anne, do you want to hear Ellen first, or do you want to add a thought before Ellen jumps in?
Just real quickly to respond to Joe, I think that absolutely it's important to not be perceived that we're telling them how to run their programs or guide their programs or even the curriculum. But I do think, and this is part of the whole academic planning process, that there's a whole transformation. I mean, part of what USG 2.0 does is it says, let's do more to plan in a more integrated way and to better connect workforce demand and business needs with some of our academic planning as well. They are quite disconnected. And I think, the information that we get from a closer business engagement, the deeper understanding, the possibilities that are there, the needs that are there, that's information for our partners to respond to, react to, innovate to, work with. So it is a change. I mean, I think it is bringing a more integrated business presence into the work that we're doing and employer presence. And that is a change that I think not all of our partners are going to, embrace necessarily. So I think that is something that we're going to have to work carefully on. And that's a big part of the academic planning transition, I think, that has to take place. So, but I hear you. And I think that you're absolutely right. The rollout of this has to be thoughtful and engaging with our partners so that they understand what we're trying to accomplish as well. So sorry, Ellen, I didn't mean to cut you off. Just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Actually, Anne, I'm going to continue down the road you just paved, because my comments were going to be kind of picking up where Joe left off, going down the path you are. What we're in is a period of where we know we need to go to, but we don't have what we need in place to get there. And when I say we, I'm not talking USG. I'm talking about higher ed. I'm talking about the University System of Maryland. What I mean by that is what we have are universities that offer degree programs out. What you're talking about, what's in Anne's strategic plan, what we tried to infuse in the system strategic plan, is reversing that model and looking at what we do from the outside back in. So you're talking about how to get more real-time, deep interaction with employers. And that's coming in, and we've got these degree programs. There's a piece that's going to have to be a transition piece that figures out how to meld these things. The other issue we have is the expectation of timing for change. They are spectacularly different. I mean, spectacularly different. I won't even say significant. It goes beyond significant. So Joe's point about the academic programs and how this will be perceived, I think, is part of that larger issue. And I think if we start from the, we're talking about how to help folks when they have their degrees get meaningful first jobs, second jobs, third jobs, careers. And to do that, we have to interact with the business community. How we then use that info is something we're going to have to work with the universities on. And we may be discovering a whole new need that we're going to have to detail out and figure out how to fill. It's not clear to me that the first way to solve this problem is to try to directly connect these two things somehow. Just my 2 cents.
Very much appreciated. That's why we brought it to you guys. Jermaine, do you want to jump in?
I'd love to. Thank you. This is such a wonderfully exciting conversation. And I appreciate all the work that has gone into it, even kind of going back to, Anne, you mentioned how everyone remembers the flywheel. I do not, because I wasn't here, but I do. But I did grasp what you were saying, even through the the challenges of the Zoomiverse. So I did. I appreciated it, and I embraced it. I did want to follow up, and let me lower. Yes, I'll lower my hand. Zoom is telling me to lower my hand. And this is a question aligned with several other comments, and I'm wondering in terms of, are the clusters the ones where USG has gone to USM and says, we know we have a certain amount of latitude to essentially move from, I'm going to what I'd say kind of an academic centric institution of higher education or higher education structure to more of a project and or industry centric structure in terms of curriculum that we offer? Because it seems that the idea of the clusters, I think, is wonderful. And then if have employers or clusters of employers share that they want A, B, and C, but then that curriculum can't be offered because for whatever reason, I think, and you, was it who just spoke? I'm sorry, you just left my screen, Ellen. Said it very eloquently. For whatever reason, right? They can't be manipulated from one of the 9 institutions. So I'm just wondering if that kind of pre-work conversation has been done. It's like, we know that these individuals, these colleges or universities rather, will help us kind of transition fields within these clusters to meet the workforce needs. Otherwise, I think we might run into, and I think a lot of us have experienced this, the same, and I know I'm new to the area, but I'm not new to higher education, some of the frustration that our workforce partners have when they tell us what we want, and our faculty don't navigate in that direction, and or they don't navigate in that direction as quickly as possible, whether it be for accreditation purposes, and we're talking about complete paradigm shift, whether it be for regulatory matters, but there's a host of reasons. So again, I'm being repetitive, and I think I'm sharing with others, but that whole academic piece and knowing, I think it's almost like starting really strong with 2 or 3 academic components that UMD or whoever said, if the employers in Montgomery County said they want this, we are willing to alter it. And I'll share an example. We have we've stood up a cloud computing associates, right? And I know we have, system folks here. Nobody in Maryland will touch it at the system. Virginia will. Virginia, they couldn't wait to sign the articulation agreement to have our graduates go over and complete a bachelor's that they have in cloud computing. But nobody in the system will touch it. So I think there's a lot of conversation. And I mentioned that because we are a partnership, right? MCPS to MC to USG. Can we get cloud computing bachelors at USG? Because we're sending a bunch of graduates to Virginia. So I'll stop there. I had other quick comments about, I think if the conversation about how we're measuring post-completion success and which part is there a work group who's looking at that? Because we're talking about changing lives, along with the changing lives piece, just ensuring that we're looking at the equity component in terms of that. And then the last piece I had was employers. How do we ensure that in the clusters that they're not going to multiple clusters? I understand that the clusters will talk with each other, and that would be great. But if, as we all know, if I'm kind of I'm in a hospital, not only do I need medical professionals, I need IT professionals, right? I need accountants. I need a host of individuals, and I don't want to have to go to multiple different clusters. So while there's an interconnectivity of the clusters, how do we ensure that maybe multiple clusters are also showing up to meet, one employer or one workforce entity? So I was holding a lot in there, and I appreciate everyone listening. So thank you.
Can I just jump in real quickly to Jermaine's exceptionally important comments? I think there's 3 sets of interests in here that we have to keep in mind. One is, Jermaine has pointed out, business, industry, employers want certain skills and demands in the cloud computing. Believe me, we all have heartburn over cloud computing. So that's something we got to figure out. But cloud computing, or there are certain demands and skill interests, and there is always this conversation with academia over, this is what we need. How come we can't get it? And academics saying, well, this is what we produce, and this is the accreditation, and this is the skill set. So even getting to a conversation, I think, is progress on this. It's not going to change overnight. Absolutely not. And I think, Jermaine, the idea behind the Ready Institute is an idea of pushing this conversation into more of a data-driven, data visualization space, so that there's information about this. I think our academic partners, as Joe has pointed out, it's not going to be an Ellen. It's not going to be an overnight change or embrace of this. This is longstanding institutional things, but I do believe that putting our partners together with business partners, with data informed, to see opportunities, to see where we can do better with what we have, with the current curriculum we have. I don't think we have to change all of the academic curriculum necessarily. I think we have to think about how we deliver it, how it's accessible, how it's connected, and maybe some tweaking that can happen in there as well. But I think those are things, I think we can make so much progress in just thinking more holistically and together in this space to address some of this. But I also want to say that we had a conversation yesterday about the student experience. And a lot of times there's this assumption that if we get the skill sets right, if we produce the students, employers are going to automatically, like, well, we've got a partnership with Shady Grove, we want interns, and then those interns will come to work for us. Well, students are making a lot of choices, and the graduates today are not the same as the graduates of the past. They're looking at a lot of different factors. There's a lot of ideas and it's a different kind of employee, I think. And so we have to also realize that in this mix of everything that we're doing, and I know, Jermaine, this is at the center of everything you do and your work with the student experience. In the center of all this, we have to remember that, students are making choices in this process too. And part of this is an educational opportunity for employers as well as academics around the student experience too. So I think the opportunity to forge this broader three-way conversation in this process around pathways, not to say academic partners, this is what you must do or what you have to, but here are some opportunities. Here are some ways we can connect. Here are some gaps and problems. Here's where students are not making it. Here's where students are not, here's a pathway students are not, falling into. But also to Jermaine's point, I think we tackle this in small bites, in pilots, working together. Jermaine and Monifa and I are already starting these conversations about where we can start doing some collaborative work in very specific areas to connect our three institutions, but also to start bringing the work together to do this kind of planning. So sorry, that was a big response to Jermaine's excellent points, but I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
Where clearly there's a lot to think about and talk about. Kevin?
Well, again, just Anne's sort of ended where I'll begin around the context of this conversation is exactly what one would hope it would be. We're having it around the fact that we're going to do some changing to how we're going to function. But this is all about innovation and how we actually infuse that into the system. And so if the partners don't expect us to do exactly what we're doing around this, then we've got a disconnect that we've, as Ellen said, maybe it is a chasm that we've just got to continue to work on to close. But this is exactly what I would hope the chancellor would expect from us and the presidents would expect from us, to look at these challenges of how the students are integrating and interacting with the system as a whole through these programs that are offered here, that would allow us to experiment with some of these. And we may be looking at this, we might not get it just right, which means that we go back to the drawing board again, working with them to try other things. But this is exactly what we're hoping to be able to do, is to infuse these sort of new ideas, different approaches, innovation hub, as we declare ourselves, and wanting them to recognize us as. So I'll stop there because I think I'm just repeating what's just been said.
And I think if I can go way back to Joe's original point, which kicked off this part of the conversation, I think, we all, those of us who have tried to lead change know it's probably the hardest thing you can do is leading change, especially change you're imposing on yourself. And I think we have to always be mindful of the amount of time and effort we have to build into our plans for communication. And, I would say, in answer to Joe's, wonderful point, we need to spend a lot more time talking, not just to the presidents, not just to the provosts, but to any number of folks throughout the system about these kinds of changes. And we're going to have to do that with the system level plan as well, because as you well know, the two plans are very well aligned in terms of seeing the need for significant change. And I can tell you, as we're working on our implementation planning process, we are looking to pick individual universities as partners for specific goals, not to roll them out across everything. So this idea of picking a couple of willing partners to experiment with, I think is really important. But, the more time we build in for communication and interactive dialogue, the better off we're going to be. And I don't think we're there at all yet. Thank you, Joe.
Really fair point. Larry, you had your hand up. I want to make sure we come to you with your question.
I mean, I think what we're going through now is really important discussions. And mine's a little bit back to basics, as Belinda and I have chaired the board engagement Historically, as you mentioned earlier, it was a Stu or an Ann or Mary or somebody on the committee that has come up with somebody that we believe is appropriate. And we've struggled. We talk about being in a silo as a committee. How do we have outreach, to all of us? So we're all thinking in terms of, who are we as an organization? Where can we add people? There's a couple of thoughts I have. I mean, part of our responsibility as a committee and us as a whole is to breed our successors. I mean, we have term limits, and we add people and we ask people to stay who particularly have, interest and who are serving us well, and coming up with a solution, from that end, I think is really important. So, I just welcome this discussion in how we continue to think of, who best serves us. The second thought I have, which you mentioned earlier, is we recognize this as a volunteer organization for everybody. But I think all of us, because of the passion that we have and the commitment we have, once somebody accepts, I think we're entitled to have expectations from those people. And by boarding them on early with the types of things that you talked about, and we can talk about that further, I think, is really important. Candidly, in my case, it took me a couple of years to get a voice, to get at, if we can get people day one starting down a path that plays to their strength and our needs, I think we all benefit. So I just wanted to get back to that, which is a little bit of basics compared to some of the discussion, but I think it's all something we have to address. Thanks.
No, it's a really important point, Larry. Thank you. Thank you to everybody who's jumped in. I'll pause here just to try to tie a few threads together and then, open it back up for any other thoughts. Larry, I think the perspective you bring is, those of us who sit in the Board of Advisors chair, I think that's not an uncommon experience to sort of figure out, how do I best help here? What is my value add? And we've tried to get at that a number of ways. We've tried to talk about it when we first bring you on. We've tried to set you up with a board buddy who can sort of talk you through it. We've tried to do individual outreach, and all have been imperfect. And some of it is it just takes time, right? I mean, so part of that is a reality, but I do think front loading some of it, really having a very concrete conversation as we recruit someone. Larry, we've invited you on because this is what we need. You have the perfect background, you have the perfect network. We'd love for you to come on. This is what, these are some ways we think you can help right away. That kind of early conversation may help people really see their role a little bit more clearly from the get-go. So I appreciate that. That's from kind of the board member perspective. I think the other thing that I just want to say, and the point about communication, really important. The point about, the expectations management. I think when we, as the officers, started having this conversation about structure, we weren't thinking about going out to employers and making the offer. You just tell us what you need and we're going to have Shady Grove respond. Not at all, right? We were just sort of thinking about, how do we position ourselves literally best to support the need that exists right now, before anybody changes anything, before pathways are really in place, before we think about other, degree programs, before we figure out how to deal with cloud computing, before we change anything. Is there a different way that Board of Advisor members can interact to better meet the existing need? So right now, our partners have desires for their students about internships and experiential work. And, is there a way for us to sit in a space and be in a slightly different conversation that's not a committee that we generated and invited someone to, but where we show up for them in doing the work they're already doing, and listen and have conversation. And then when they say to us, we'd really love to find this for our students, we get activated to help find this. So I just wanted to share how I was envisioning it. And all of these points are fair, talking about it, and it's gonna morph. And the whole change to pathways and career readiness is going to be a painful transition. And the board is going to be in that with Shady Grove and our partners. But in the very short term, I think there's a way in which this works before we even get to all of that change. My 2 cents. Other questions? So here's what I will say. I think the caution that I take away from today is, A, go slow, B, think a little more deeply, and C, really think about how we talk about this to other people. So we're in a little bit of that push and pull, because some things need to happen. We have some board members who are transitioning off the board. We need to bring in some board members, and we definitely need to create and propose a slate of some officers. We certainly can be a little flexible with each other, but ideally, when we all convene as a full board on June 14th, we have at least the officer piece in place. The other things can still be maybe thought through to the next best level. We don't have to form all our committees right now, but we do want to think about getting ahead of the next academic year so that we can be productive and supportive. So maybe I'd like to make sure we get before we move to any other conversation today is just a conversation on the officers. So we've had some suggestion that maybe being sure we stick with 3 vice chairs makes some sense. Any other thoughts or discussion about the officers and putting the officers in that role where, because the officers will sort of see the whole picture, probably connect to all the industry clusters, be in more regular contact with Anne and Mary, help fill in some of what Larry described the board engagement committee was doing before, which is engage all our board and helping think through where do we have gaps in experience, talent, passion that we need to fill, and who knows them. Maybe if we can just come to some agreements about those and then continue to work through this process. Kevin?
So we have, right now there's 3 of us, and we know Mike's on the leaving us zone. Is he gone already? Looks like he's left us. And then there's who I've talked to about this process is Steve. I've talked to Eric and Broya, who is a current vice chair at this point. And again, part of, and again, if Eric, I appreciate any comments you might have here, because one of the comments that I think the Board of Advisors has had over time is some of the activities created conflicts for some members. And Eric and I had a good conversation about his role on the board and where his strengths lie, and some of the things that are more difficult because it does create some conflicts for him. But I'm a big Eric fan, just because I think he thinks out of the box. He's got great connections to the universities, and obviously NIST that we work with so much that his opinions were valued. But I think in the advocacy side, it puts him in a difficult position. But in this new world order, I mean, he fits to me as we look at the flywheel. I suspect he could picture himself in a spot there that would be much more reasonable than trying to be an advocate for the organization. So I'd be interested, Eric, just based on what you've heard now and the conversation we had earlier, some of your thoughts.
Thanks so much. It was really interesting to listen. I was a little bit late, so I missed the very beginning, but I think I got most of the fireworks and the key issues for it. They're not new, so I'm familiar with those constraints as well. As Kevin noted, the main restriction for myself and the government and others who are in the public sector is the advocacy piece. And so, we can't go to Annapolis. Really have to be careful who I talk to about what type of topics. It's sort of second nature. It's not really difficult, but it does mean there's some parts that have been served by the board that are not really in appropriate space for what I can do, or others in my position to do so. But that being said, that's not really what I heard here is the centerpiece of that. And there's certainly a role, and Anne and Mary and many of you have been very effective already. So it's not really like there's a gap that is not being filled on that front. I do think the way it's structured here, I was thinking more of it in a workflow point of view, as not necessarily in the philosophical and the change part of it. Those are certainly of great interest to ourselves at NIST and within the government. And because we can also see the changing nature of higher ed without a real clear path of how it gets there. And so I think this approach is, to me, simplifies, in a weird way, it simplifies what more work could look like. It just concentrates it in different areas where it makes sense, and then finding the places to where it has a place to go is much more clear. And that's the infrastructure piece that still needs to be built. Because I think regardless of how we want the world to be seen and the options we want people to experience, there are pockets of focus, right? So public sector and business and IT and life sciences, they are distinct enough that they have their own ecosystems that merit that attention. And even if they have IT people in bio and actually bio people in IT, then the orientation of a student or someone who's just trying to navigate still starts in a certain place. And so that's, I think, still more efficient to do so. But then it is more work, because I think Shirley was very direct about it. You know, there's going to be requests at the very front to go do, but in a sense, it's simpler and clearer. And so those are easier to do than trying to think of what you should do at the moment that you try it. So I think just as I think there's already, the last thing I'll say is that the idea that Anne described of a convening space that we've been using where these conversations can happen, especially like I think to Ellen's point about, look, what you're asking for doesn't fit where academia is, but we have a place to let them know. And for a place like Shady Grove, which is built upon being a broker, that flips it into a strength rather than, you know, like a place that's kind of stuck between two cultures without a way to go. And so that to me is a way to flip it in a sense that makes it constructive. And I think, you know, I think academia is going to be struggling with, they are already, right? Jermaine's mentioning it already, is like, what do we do? And how many changes can you make at once? But I think this way kind of, you know, locates it into a narrow band to at least try out ideas to go do. So I echo a lot of what was said, and for myself, I don't think other than the advocacy piece, I think the rest fits with how government is changing too.
So the other opinion who I think would be worth hearing here too is PJ's, primarily because of the role that the board has had, and for such a long time, I don't like to use the word adversarial, but we've not had the roles of what we've been trying to do in working with the system and having them recognize our value. We've seen a bit of a sea change. In my mind, leadership matters, but we also know this is fragile at this point as we try to work through all of this. So I'm mindful that advocacy is important, that the connections we have, and that the executive committee of the board has to have a focus on this. And while the flywheel are pieces that we've got to focus on, because that's going to be how the system measures whether or not we're success, how well we focus on our strategic plan. But the other parts of this are how do we make sure we keep ourselves in the eye of our legislature, our state executives, and county executives and legislatures, that we're all doing right things. And so I'll be interested in your opinions, PJ, on that.
Sure. I'm sorry, I had to jump off from 9 to 9:20 for another call, so I may have missed a bunch of things. Sorry. Look, here's how I view it as far as advocacy goes. It's a constant drumbeat kind of reminding elected officials, you know, whether it be at the county level, at the state level, you know, legislature, executive branch, about USG and why it's important, and the return on the investment the state gets for that. It's just, that's what it is. It's just that's my day job, is just constantly, you know, beating on you know, elected officials. And in some ways, look, I love advocating for USG because I believe in it. But I can also very comfortably and easily, explain to folks about USG from its very beginning to where it is now and where it wants to be in the future. And also, one of the beauties is I find elected officials somewhat receptive to my conversations because I make it very clear to them, I'm doing this because I believe in it. It's this is not a paying client. So, they're used to me coming to them constantly, on behalf of, my clients. So it's almost like they say, oh, you want to talk about USG. They know it's not a client, and they tend to be very receptive. I know the conversations I had this past session with, with Guy Gazzone, the chairman of Budget and Tax, and Maggie McIntosh. They both were like, okay, what do you need? And
PJ, I'm gonna, if you'll indulge me, I'm gonna stop you there just because I'm mindful of time. So appreciate the thoughts. Here's what I will share. We have a process. The process is that we, the officers, kind of speaking as a nominating committee, will propose a slate, but we are also open to self-nominations from all the board. Part of why we're having this conversation today is so people, before they self-nominate, know what they're stepping into. Managing change, as we've said, can be challenging. So where we are today, and with the good feedback and ideas that you've given us, we need to regroup and put a slate out to the full board for their consideration, also with an opening for anyone who would like to be considered to self-nominate. Anybody in today's conversation who wants to reach out to us, please let us know. We will have a transition in leadership in the summer-ish timeframe before the next academic year. It has been, no secret, because we've shared with you that we are going to nominate Kevin to take the baton as chair, but putting together the vice chair team. Expect our slate. Think about whether you'd like to be considered. It will go out with the process, and then we will move from there on. And we'll obviously need a little more conversation about the specific role of the committees and the committee chairs. So this will be continued, and some of it will come up again when we're together in person on June 14th. Any other comments?
I just wanted to add one note to the clusters and the committees. As you heard, the board engagement committee will go away and be part of the responsibility of the officers. We are intending to keep an advocacy and communication committee for exactly PJ's help on that, because we have many government representatives that are statutory members of the board. And secondly, there was funding in last year's budget for an extensive marketing branding campaign that goes beyond all of the industry clusters. And we're hoping that Andy will help us manage that work. So there is still an effort and a need for the board to have that as a standing committee moving forward, in addition to the clusters. So I just wanted to let you know or remind you all of that point.
Thank you, Mary. And, we will continue to, and Anne, I give you credit for having done this really effectively. We'll continue to tap into board members as needed on an ad hoc basis for brainstorming, for specific committee work, for particular advocacy in your area of expertise. We remain a team. How we organize ourselves to be the most effective to support the new strategic plan is something that we're evolving together, but our commitment to the students and the institution unites us, and people can be tapped for any work that needs to happen. I'm going to piggyback on Mary's transition and thinking about advocacy, not just at the state level, but we're also in a new moment to think about our educational ecosystem and our work at the county level and how we strengthen those pathways. So I'm going to say one word just very quickly and about the June 24th symposium. the Board of Advisors, and kudos to the ad hoc committee. Roy has been leading, Kevin's participating on it. Yeah, we're moving ahead. It is really going to be, I think, an exciting opportunity. We've been very careful to try to make sure that all the people in the room, from the keynote speakers to the panelists to the invited guests, are people who really want to engage in a conversation about how we inspire and support more people of color and women into the STEM fields. We definitely have room for more hand-picked people who really want to engage. So I'm asking you as Board of Advisor members, if you have thoughts or ideas about people in your network, people in the community for whom this is an issue of passion, who you want to make sure we include in the audience, now's the time to share any additional names. We've done a first wave of invitations, but still have some room. It is a commitment to participate for the morning of June 24th, and the timing may be getting in the way for some people. So I just want to do an all call for invitations. Roya, anything else that you want to share about the symposium?
No, I think probably in previous meetings, we talked about the role of the Board of Advisors at the symposium and how we would love for you to participate. I think one of the things we want to be sure of, that we're inviting the VIP guests that are kind of bringing in a momentum and an energy that will continue for the next annual event, that we create a community of people. And in doing so, we as a Board of Advisors have a lot of opportunities to connect and to talk and to react. We want to make sure that the attendees of this event have the platform to do so, but especially because they're going to be in listening mode when the panel is speaking. When the panels come to the breakout tables, we want to make sure that the VIP guests are speaking the most. And in doing that, we'll probably have a table for the Board of Advisors who will have a free-for-all conversation and reaction to the panels, while the other breakouts will be focused on particular topics of interest. So long story short, please come, please participate with the Board of Advisors, and we will reconvene as an executive committee, as a board, to talk about the reactions to the event and what next steps we want to take to continue to invigorate this energy, being mindful that we're trying to create an event that people look forward to every year, where they talk about transformational initiatives that can be tactically executed, not just, hey, we talked about this really cool thing, we're really passionate about it, and now, you know what, we're back to our everyday lives and nothing's happening. So really thank you in advance for participating, and thank you in advance for keeping the energy alive as we look from this year's event to the year that follows.
Any questions on the symposium? I'm going to just say, I'm going to put in the chat, please remember to hold June 30th. Remember, is your invitation to a dinner to meet and have time to chat with Jermaine Williams. And July 25th is going to be our celebration, our thank you, our recognition for those board members who are completing their terms, and celebration of the work that's been done. So those are two dates that I hope you'll keep on your calendar. And then, Anne, I'm going to give you the last minutes to talk with us about some of the exciting work at the county level.
First of all, thank you to the ad hoc committee, and Shirley and Roya for your leadership on this Thought Leadership Symposium. It's going to be really good. Great guests. It'll be a really fantastic conversation. So I'm very excited about that work going forward. So as part of our strategic plan, our flywheel identifies measure, learn, and assess to be a data-driven organization, not only within USG, but with our partners, how we plan, how we measure student success, how we support student success, and how we innovate around student success, especially for non-traditional students who are our students here at Shady Grove. And in thinking about, as the system plan points out, the challenges that we're facing in higher education are not solved with just more degree programs and better advertising. They're addressed by thinking holistically about the student experience and the pathways that students are on and the opportunities students have to secure higher education opportunities, excuse me. And so out of that, it came an idea around the Ready Institute. We shared some of this idea with the council way back in March 2021, I think it was, with Hans Riemer and Craig Rice, about how we envision some of the challenges around pathways in the system and in the county, that we need some interinstitutional mechanisms to do some holistic thinking about pathways. We partner currently very deeply with Montgomery College, with MCPS, with other community colleges as well, on articulation agreements, on transfer agreements, all these things. But to scale that, to really increase opportunity, to really take equity to the next level and really open up opportunities for students, we need some interinstitutional support to do that. And so Hans Riemer, who is the chair of the Planning, Housing, and Education Economic Development Committee, currently on the County Council, and Craig Rice, who chairs the Education and Culture Committee, they challenged Shady Grove to come up with this idea of an institute, of the Ready Institute. We put that idea forward. It was funded. The county council has funded it. It's passed the budget. It's $475,000 in one-time funds to stand this up. Standing it up means working closely with Montgomery College and MCPS, MCEDC, and WorkSource Montgomery to develop a plan. What role can this institute play to catalyze some of the collective work that we do together in the county, to bring together more of business demand with academic opportunities, academic programming opportunities across the ecosystem. And so we're very excited about standing this up and figuring out how to activate it. And we will be hiring a director for this. And if the funding goes forward for it, if we can show some proof of concept in this first year, there would be additional county funding that would come along to support staff from all of the institutions in this space. We envision Ready in two big areas. One is around planning. So being a place, as I mentioned earlier, to convene, to bring together our academic partners, to bring together our partners in the Montgomery County ecosystem, to think holistically about opportunities and where each of us can stand up to try to address, fill in, build new programs, partner, innovate in order to meet workforce demand and increase opportunities for students. We also envision it as a place where research can be done in order to better understand the student experience, student success, where students are faltering, where they're succeeding. We envision all 9 of our academic partners and maybe everybody in the University System of Maryland engaged in some type of research or seeing Montgomery County and what we're doing here as a place to experiment, test out, learn, and then take those lessons and apply them back to the pathway work that we're doing, but especially to take those lessons and apply them back to home campuses and across the system as well. So the Ready Institute we are super excited about it. I think we're a little bit shocked that everything went through. A number of people on this call were very supportive in moving this along. And we're excited to work on moving this forward. This is the first time the county, with the exception of the parking garage, which was a huge county investment in Shady Grove as part of the BSE. This is the first time the county has directly invested in Shady Grove in this work. And we see this as a really important milestone. And we're excited to work with our partners to use it as a way to, again, catalyze some interinstitutional collective thinking in this space.
It is really exciting. And I think for those of us who've been in all these conversations, it is the place where we're going to probably start to really dig into that data and those understandings that are going to make this pathway real, right? We are definitely, all the conversations we've ever had with MCPS and MC and trying to move students through and create these pathways is built on a foundation of better understanding where some of the challenges are and getting past some of the barriers, and Ready seems like the perfect way to start getting that all to happen. So it's very exciting work. It will mean that we need to also keep our focus. PJ before was talking about Annapolis, but also we need to stay focused on the county because so much of the pipeline work and the enrollment, it is our county students who really feed USG, where I think, are we at 75% of our students who come to us, on the pathway. So this has always been incredibly meaningful. And I think this is just going to give us the tools and the resources to really make the conversations we've had with our partners more real. And this will probably come back to us as board members through some of the joint work that we do with the Board of Education, the Board of Trustees at Montgomery College, all under the leadership of Anne Germain and Monifa. So we are at time. Anything else for the good of the order before we step away? Thank you for a really thoughtful and engaging conversation. We count on you guys for it, and you come through. So we really appreciate it, and see you in person on the 14th. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Test, test. This is a test.